First of all, good morning, everyone. For this presentation, I'll be focusing more on the extended and multifamily households. And this this focus is being made because of what we've seen earlier, that households have been veering away from the typical composition of household head, spouse, or a child. And as seen in this figure that was also presented earlier, um, there is a significant proportion already of households that are extended and multifamily. So in 2020, around 28.8% of the households in the Philippines were already in this household type. And if we examine further the extended and multifamily household type, we can make we can divide them into three classifications. The first one is wherein the household head lives with the own family. So the head is joined by a spouse, son or daughter, and a relative outside of the own family, and possibly a non-relative. And then there's another classification wherein the household head lives with a root family. So the head can be joined by a parent, a sibling, a relative outside the root family, and possibly a non-relative. And then for the third classification, we have a householder living with other relatives. So the head is living with a relative who is not part of the own and the root family. And also he or she could be living with a non-relative. And if we look at the components of each of these classifications and the corresponding sizes, typical sizes or average sizes, we are seeing that the first classification has the highest number of members. And we think that this is because of the presence of a son or a daughter. So it can be that the son or daughter has decided to stay in the parental home, or if they did leave the parental home, they have come back, or they have decided to join their relatives in a household to, for example, help or gain support in growing their own family, or to be able to gain support as well in terms of um, payments of living and housing expenses. But this is only an assumption, and our team wanted to um, actually um, determine the factors that contribute to these extended and multifamily households. And we did this by conducting a study last year. And in that study, we focused on young adults because we expect that these young adults, this 20, 20 this 25 to 34 young adults are actually are expected to leave their parental home and possibly form their decision um because of uh concerns on work, um also childcare and so on. So we try to look into these factors by undertaking regressions. So I will be presenting two of the regression models that we developed in the study. The first one I will be presenting is based on an outcome of is has an outcome of being in an extended and multifamily household. It was run for 25 to 34-year-old individuals in 2020, which were around 15.1 million persons. The second model used a manually constructed panel dataset. The panel dataset was manually constructed because the main dataset that we used for the study, which is the Philippine Statistics Authority Census of Population and Housing dataset, does not necessarily follow the same observations of the same identification over time. So this may have implications on the results of the second regression model. Nevertheless, we still see that this provides insights on given that this has been done over time. This covers years over time. So the data set, the second regression model data that used this manually constructed panel data set involved around 10.7 million individuals. So um, the 25 to 34-year-olds in 2000 were thought to grow older to 35 to 44-year-olds in 2010, and subsequently 45 to 54-year-olds in 2020. And the outcome for this model is the proportion of those in extended and multifamily households. Now, in this slide, we just want to show you the equations that were used in each of the models, but and most especially the variables that were plugged in. So in the first model, which is the 2020 model, this is actually multinomial logistic regression model, and it used variables that are related to socioeconomic and environmental factors. The socioeconomic factors include an individual's sex, marital status, whether the individual is living in a household with child, an elderly, the individual's wealth, estimate what the status of the working status of the individual, class of work, place of work, education, religion, ethnicity, housing tenure, and also financing of the housing unit. The environmental factors include residential construction price, whether the individual lives in an area that is urban or rural, and uh, actually most of these the data on these variables um, were based on data from the PSA. But the last one, which is the local government unit quadrant, is based on data from the local government academy. So they have classifications of local government units or LGUs as in terms of performance and capacity. And if we look now at before in the second model, the 2000 to 2020 model, we tried to control for entity and time fixed effects, and it shows it used we actually used similar variables as in the first model, but there are some differences like um sex was excluded as an independent variable because it was used instead as one of the characteristics differentiating the observations in the creation of the panel dataset.
Miss
So
Tatum?
yes,
Miss Tatum? Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off.
sure.
There's a black box covering part of the screen. It might be the Zoom chat box. Could you please hide it so that we can see the full slide?
All right,
Thank
let me
you.
just check. Is something still blocking the screen?
Yes.
Where is it actually placed? I'm sorry, I cannot see it because right now what's only shown on my screen is the lower the video panels.
Yeah, I think that's the video panel is already blocking, and then that's
All
the
right,
it's at the lower left side of the screen.
lower left side of the screen. I don't have any other window open, so I'm not sure what exactly this is. Can I just
Um,
ask um just ask Jenica, Jen, are you there? Can you just please share the screen instead so that we can
okay.
move on? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mamel. Okay, okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Jen. Thank you, Mamel. Okay, so
Thank
to proceed, um, uh, before we jump into the presentation of the regression results, um, I would just like to give you an overview on the distribution of the 25 to 34-year-olds by household type and their role in extended and multifamily households in 2020. So you are seeing on the figure that around 36% of those individuals were actually already in extended and multifamily households. And out of that subset, only around 18% were householders. So this tells us that there were already many of the young adults living in the extended and multifamily household type, and also that they may not have the capacity to become householders, or may not be able to afford their own housing, which is why they joined this household type. Next slide, please. But to establish that idea further, let's look at the regression results. So the first result or estimate that you're seeing on the screen is on wealth. And it tells us that on average, the difference in the probability of being in an extended and multifamily household, given a 1 unit increase in the wealth estimate, is a 6.5 percentage point increase. So this tells us that aside from wealthier individuals probably having greater capacity to take on additional members in their household, they may also have been taking advantage of a resource sharing opportunity. And this opportunity seems to be taken advantage of as well by those individuals whose marital status were single. So compared to those who were not single, those who are single had a higher probability of being in an extended and multifamily household by around 4.2 percentage points. So, what an example of a situation wherein individuals are taking advantage of the resource sharing opportunity is when they share in the payments for particular assets, or let's say payments for food. Next slide, please. If we look at place of work compared to those who live and work in the same place, um, those who work in a different city or municipality have a higher probability of being in an extended and multifamily household by around 4.2, 4.7 percentage points. So it is possible that there are relatives that are left at home, or staying at home or nearby the house to ensure the security of the house, while the other members are working in a different city or municipality. And we see a similar effect in terms of working females. Next slide, please. So compared to non-working females, they have a higher probability of being in an extended and multifamily household by around 19.2 percentage points. So it's also possible that other household members are staying at home to provide support for these working young female adults, and actually taking on the responsibilities that may have once been associated with the females in the household. Next slide, please. Now, if we look at the results of the 2000 to 2020 model, we are seeing that extended and multifamily households is actually an unlikely setup for the less educated. So a higher portion of those whose highest educational attainment is preschool, kinder, or did not complete any grade at all decreases the proportion of those in extended and multifamily households. So they may not have the capacity to take on to include relatives or take on additional members in their household. For the next estimate, we are seeing that a higher proportion of individuals living in a household with elderly increases the proportion of extended and multifamily households, uh, increases the proportion of individuals living in extended and multifamily households. So what we're seeing is that um, this actually may be reflecting the elderly care arrangement in the Philippines. Um, some of the elderly may actually prefer to be taken care of by their relatives instead of non-relatives. But if we look at the next estimate, we also see that a higher proportion of those individuals living in a household with child decreases the proportion of those in extended and multifamily households. So these individuals actually prefer to be in a nuclear household type to form their own households instead of joining or building an extended and multifamily household. But if we look also at the next estimate, um, wherein we take into consideration the residential construction price with the variable on individuals having living in a household with child, we see that the impact or that preference switches from a nuclear one to an extended and multifamily household. So this means that housing prices or residential construction price poses a constraint on the decision making of an individual in terms of forming their own households. So, given all those findings, regression results, and the other things that I have discussed in the previous slides, let me move on to the concluding remarks. So, the first point I want to make is that the formation of extended and multifamily households is not necessarily detrimental to society. It actually the extended and multifamily households actually offer a resource sharing opportunity, even for those whose marital status is single, given that they can have other members help in the uh, payments of particular assets. And it also this household type also provides support for working young female adults who may not necessarily have the same amount of time or cannot put the same amount of effort in household management activities as before. Mm, The household type also provides support for young adults working far from their residence. So other members can help ensure the security of the house, can also support household management activities. And it also provides support to the elderly who may not necessarily have the same capacity to undertake the same activities that they previously had before. And also a support for young families with children who are trying to grow their own family and raise their own children. However, given all these benefits or potential benefits, the addition of relatives in the household appears to be rooted in constrained decision making. So we saw from the findings that young adults had insufficient capacity to become householders and afford their own housing, which is why they have um, joined or built these extended and multifamily households. So, given the findings that we had from this study and the study that was presented earlier, I'd like to pass on the floor to Dr. Ballesteros to provide some recommendations. Something.
Thank you, Tatum. Yes, this is just last two slides for us. Yeah, I think aside from the fact that multi extended households or resource sharing, it's not really that's the positive or the benefits part of it, but the other side is that even aside from it being based on a constrained decision making, it has also led to deficit to space problem congestions. Okay, so what is our policy recommendation? This is for the two studies because they are related. So first is our response to I think the way we respond or government respond to backlogs have always been on production. Yeah, and it has actually been a justification to increase budget for production of housing. But is it really a quantitative issue or is it a qualitative issue? We say backlog and all that, but we see that there are different ways of dynamics. So when I say qualitative, maybe what we need is probably look at urban renewal at, uh, programs. There are a lot already of CMPs around, but still it's not well developed, and it could be actually developed so that they can be further accommodate more housing. Or maybe what we need is a better estate management. So have we really considered these options beyond just producing housing? The second point is that government really has to address low attainability of housing in the country. That actually we have one of the lowest. And I have emphasized this in the earlier study that we have on housing affordability. So what really drives land and housing prices? Uh, we the study in 1993 by the World Bank is, I think, still uh, relevant up to this time, especially for land. And that is, they're saying that it's actually speculative in a sense. Um, I believe that these forces are still at play, and this is actually reflected in the high cost of developed land, even for lands that are already been zoned as urban. Because we were saying, it's conversion, but even for zoned urban lands, there is still a high cost of development. So, what do we do, or what could be the measures to address this? I think what government should really do is to make sure that the gap between compensation wages as well as, or I mean, income and wealth and housing prices does not widen. And there are several ways of doing that. One is through real property valuation, which is actually more provide a more equitable and efficient valuation system for the proper implementation of real estate taxation as well as expropriation of real properties. Uh, we also mentioned uh, the implementation of an idle land tax, and until now we don't really have a clear definition of what is an idle land. Betterment taxes, when government uh, improves, provide infrastructure in lowlands, there should be some taxation that's happening so that uh, this can be used for other programs of the government. Then you can do anti-speculative measures, which can be done through the financial regulations, such as having financial ceilings on loan to real estate value, providing higher taxes for foreign borrowers of housing, which is actually done in other countries. So ensuring that there's no over borrowing from rich families for residential investment. So these are the things that drives demand artificially and of course housing prices. Then the other point that we wanted to mention is that housing is localized. So you need to understand what is the local housing need. Um, it's not the same for all. Like what we know is that Calabar Zone and NCR are the center of livelihood jobs. About 70% of GDP are drawn for the are from that from this region. So what does that mean? Do we have do we have to just to build do we have to build housing only in these regions? Um, and maybe I was talking about rental strategies, but probably you have to also review the strategies. Maybe it's not already the apartment type of housing. If people prefers to commute, of course you need to improve on public transportation, but you could also improve on temporary housing. Like I know there are developers that are developing container rental housing. It's not something that uh, developers are keen on, but maybe there are certain efforts on that area. And probably, again, uh, provide subsidies for direct subsidies for MSMEs, for instance, for employees' housing. Okay. The other point is, oh yeah, I think is you have to provide a framework. As you said, we are in the sweet spot of demographic dividends. So you have to balance the productive environment, housing consumption, and supply. So I mentioned giving direct incentive to SME employers for workers, housing support. And the last point or recommendation has something to do with devising, next slide, please, a housing program for the elderly. Actually, we have an ongoing study by Dr. Aubrey Tabuga at PIDS on the future demand for elderly care. Uh, and what and one of the preliminary findings is that this is primarily family and home based. But home base and family base housing for the elderly is going to become more difficult and challenging over time. So in terms of habitability of housing, the space sufficiency, the rising cost of housing, and of course, including the the uh, lesser the activities of the working population. There is also actually studies showing that disease patterns and illnesses for the elderly are increasing in cases where there's a need for more care. So these are things that need to be considered. Development of institutional care homes um, in the future. But of course, we know that, as you have seen, the ownership is mostly with the elderly, with the the age cohort, the elderly cohort. And what we could do perhaps is to explore on reverse mortgage program to support or finance yung institutional care for uh, the elderly. And I think this will become even more challenging as our health and care workers migrates to other countries. So uh, actually the possibility of home care, home-based, family-based um, care for the elderly will dissipate in the future. So that's, I think, our final point for this study. Thank you, Ms.